This week, we find out if the Clarets managed to get their first points of the season away at Newcastle and just who walked through the doors of Turf Moor on transfer deadline day. This is the Known and Never podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of the No Nay Never podcast. And goodness me, do we have a show for you this evening. Joining me as your host, Natalie Bromley, as ever, are three of our panellists. We have Robbie, George and Richard. However, for the second half of this show, we're opening our doors and we are going to try and conduct our first fan phone-in. It's going to go one of two ways, listeners, and regular listeners will know the chaotic nature of the Known and Never podcast is probably going to mean that it ain't going to go smoothly, but we're going to give it a try. We're going to get your thoughts on exactly what's going on at Turf Moor. As I mentioned, lots to talk about, mainly because all is not well in Camp Burnley at the moment, listeners. What on earth is going on? We didn't get points on the board, spoiler alert, away at Newcastle at the weekend. We are 3 games in, 3 straight losses, too many goals conceded, and we have got 0, well, apart from Stevens, who we'll come on to in a moment, we really haven't got the personnel through the door that we wanted on transfer deadline day. So we are going to mull all of that over and try and find out what's going on and where we go from here. So without further ado, let's get into it. And Richard, I'm going to come to you first. Richard, good evening. How are you?
Good evening, Natalie. Yeah, I'm pretty good. All circumstances given. Yeah.
Yeah, we are. We're going to try and keep this as upbeat as possible, aren't we? It's going to be a very difficult show because there's not an awful lot of good news out there, but we're going to try our best to find out what's going on. So let's dive straight into a very disappointing night. For me, Richard, it wasn't just necessarily the third defeat on the road, but it was the nature of the defeat as well.
Oh, it was dire, it was desperate, and it was drab. It was dull. It was horrendous to watch at times. We had a little 15-minute spurt at the start of the second half, and we got back in the game. And I thought, here we go, we might get something here. But other than that, it was just terrible. Hoofing the ball to Barnes and Wood. And then the midfield so deep that they couldn't get anywhere near the second balls. Defensively, we was absolutely terrible. I've got a bit of sympathy for Kevin Long because I thought he did well after the lockdown, but he's been really poor this season. Completely got bullied all game by Wilson. And then you had Pope, who had his worst game in a Burnley shirt. Overall, it was just a really disappointing evening. Newcastle are a team I've watched this season, and they're definitely nothing special. And we really made them look good at times. And you're looking at the 3 games we've played, and how are we going to stay up this season? I know it's early doors, but it looks the situation looks really, really desperate for us.
Yeah, it does at the moment, but, we are only 3 games in. I think a couple of seasons ago, we only got 1 point from the opening first 5 games, I think, and we ended up staying quite comfortably that way. So we aren't going to dwell too much on the R word just yet, although it's going to be very difficult to avoid that. Richard, I'm going to come back to you on that point later on. But Robbie, I want to come to you first because Richard mentioned there that the defence, particularly in the first half, was really shambolic. We were boosted, obviously, midweek with Tarkowski's magical toe injury coming back to full fitness and being, hooray, it's well again, just short after Leicester had not put an offer in. But we're not doing conspiracy theories here. So we were boosted with him starting in the league. But were you surprised to see Kevin Long start against him as opposed to Jimmy Dunn, who a lot of people are suggesting is A, better than Kevin Long, and number 2, started the season better?
Not really. I think because Kevin Long's got a little bit more experience. I think Tarkowski and Long have also played together as well. Also, I just think it gives a bit of a stronger foundation than trying Tarkowski and Dunn, who probably never partnered each other before. It wasn't much of a surprise for me. But yeah, the performance on Saturday was pretty poor. I'm even more annoyed that I had in my fantasy football Nick Pope and Tarkowski in my team. So yeah, blame me.
We blame you for a lot of things, Robbie, but we'll just add that to the list. Well, George, coming to you, it wasn't just Tarkowski who started again at the weekend in the league. We were also boosted by Ashley Barnes returning to the starting lineup, and again, similar to the Kevin Long, Jimmy Dunn argument, a lot of people were suggesting that perhaps Matty Vidra was quite unlucky to not be given the start, and he brought Ashley Barnes into that starting lineup after a long spell out. Now, considering that he went with Long at the back instead of Jimmy Dunn and, sorry, my brain is going, Ashley Barnes instead of Matty Vidra, it looks pretty obvious that he was going for strength, doesn't it? And he was looking for some kind of robust physicality to the game.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, it's been mentioned before, both these players are experienced Daesh players. They've played with us for a long time. I know the weekend was, I think it was Barnes' 200th appearance for Burnley. And, we know all about the quality he's got. And with Wood and Barnes up there, it just means if we do end up camping in our own box a bit, we can always hit it long and hope that we win the second ball. So, yeah, I was really, really glad to see Barnes back. It's felt like so long. And I know Richard was getting a bit annoyed with his throwing himself on the floor before he got his injuries, but it's really good to see him back in a Burnley shirt, especially 200th appearance for the club. Don't really get much better than that, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he can do this season, because we've now, if they're all fit, well, obviously J-Rod's coming back, we've got 4 really good strikers there, and if Barnes can hit the ground running, and he got one disallowed at the weekend, we've got a really good front line to build from there, and it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like I say, we'll come on to transfer talks later on, but Dyche himself has said, and this has been backed up by our previous head of state, Jamie Smith, who both noted this week that when you look at our squad and everybody's back fit, actually, is it that bad a squad? And maybe we're looking at this at the moment with a bit of panicked eyes because we have got so many players missing. But I actually thought Ashley Barnes did really well. I was one of the fans who maybe raised an eyebrow when the squad was announced, because I would have started Matty, just because I think he earns that right. I think he just gives us a little bit more. What I worried about and what actually did happen is we would revert to long ball and hoofing it up front to Wood and Barnes to try and bypass the Newcastle midfield, and that did very much happen a lot of the time. But as you say, George, he had Barnsley had a goal disallowed. I thought he looked short. Actually, I thought his movement for the goal that was disallowed was really, really good. He'd got himself into all sorts of space, and we know that's what Ashley Barnes does well. He can push defenders away, and he can turn his body and just create himself so much space that defenders can't handle. So actually, I do think it was the right choice in the end, and unfortunately, it didn't quite pay off. Richard, coming back to you then, you mentioned this in your opening assessment of the game. We can't really, I guess, criticise the guy at all, and I don't think we can dwell on this too much, given that it's been a long time since we saw this. But my God, Nick Pope chose to not just underperform, but have an absolute shocker.
Oh yeah, listen. Obviously, Pope's been unbelievable for us. Probably one of our most consistent players last season, and he's just one of them. He just had a bad game. He looked nervous from the off for me. His kicking didn't seem quite right, and then obviously the goal went in from St Maximum. Listen, he hit it hard, and obviously it wasn't the easiest of conditions for a keeper. It was wet. Could have done better with the first goal, and then obviously just an absolute shocker for the second. Back pass has come back to him, just a heavy touch. Obviously, he took Fraser down, clear penalty. Then obviously at that point it's 2-1. Even though we're not playing great, you still think, well, we can get back into the game. And that third goal absolutely killed us. And I think I don't think Tarkowski was brilliant either in the game, but obviously he's just coming back to full fitness. When you're struggling, you need your big players to step up and perform. And unfortunately, Pope didn't have a good game at all on Saturday. But I fully back him in the home game against West Brom to dust himself down, and come back again stronger. And hopefully Tarkowski, another foot, having that international break, get his fitness back up to speed. Can mean he can get solid and hopefully have Ben Mee next to him. All of a sudden, if you've got Ben Mee back in that defence with Tarky, it does look a lot stronger.
Yeah, it does. I think that's one of the things that we've all well, we've all known it for a long time, haven't we, that one of the constant factors in that Burnley defence, regardless of who plays alongside him, is Ben Mee. And he's such an underrated player, and he's the one that doesn't get the headlines. It's all about Michael Keane, it's all about James Tarkowski. They're the big money move signings, they're the ones that all the top 6 players are after, they're the ones that get the England call-ups. And Ben Mee always seems to get overlooked, but actually, he complements those players, and he really contributes to the success of those players who play alongside him. And I think he is, for me, the one player who we are missing more than anything. We all thought that we needed Tarky back, but obviously we've all realised very quickly that it's Ben Mee that we needed back, not just Tarkowski. Well, the halftime team talk, Robbie, seemed to go very well. Burnley were sent out early. They were out for a good 3 or 4 minutes before the Newcastle players came out, clearly being given the hard word by Daesh. And for the first 15 minutes or so, that really seemed to work. We got that goal, we equalised, and we looked a completely different side. But what we did see, and what I've seen a lot in the early stages of this season, was a Newcastle side that got themselves in front and just did a Burnley on us and just relaxed. Southampton did the same thing. We talked about this in the show last week. Sat back and just thought, well, it's job done. And the minute we equalised, they seemed to shift gear again and just scored another one. It feels very much like a lot of the sides in this league have figured us out and have worked out a very simple way to defeat us or neutralise our threat. And we don't seem to have an answer. Does that concern you?
A little bit, because whenever we aren't at our best, especially in terms of like a shape, and we seem completely well off the pace, we do look pretty easy to beat, which is a complete contrast as when Burnley are on it, we're incredibly difficult to beat. And that does worry me. We don't seem to have that resilience and resolve which maybe we had 2-3 years ago, or even when ever since really Sean Datcher's come in, even when we didn't play well, like we were always pretty good value for maybe a 0-0 or just being able to scrape out a point. But when we're bad, like really, really bad, we just seem to concede like 4, maybe 5 goals, and we're never like the defensive shape against Leicester, for example. Like just the goals we conceded are just an absolute mess, and then the goal we conceded against Southampton was a bit of a mess, and then you look at the goals we conceded against Newcastle on Saturday. It's just like this isn't I can't get my words out. Resilient Burnley, which we're all used to.
Yeah, you're right, and I think worryingly for us, I think that's what seems to be being picked up across the board, isn't it? All the pundits and all of the media outlets are all very much going with the same narrative of that there is something wrong, and they might not be able to put their finger on it, and they might only be speculating, but we just don't look ourselves at all. Now, as you rightly said, it may very well be that once we get everybody back, we get that nucleus of the squad back, and we've got those players playing together who know each other inside out, then the situation will look very different. But George, irrespective of all of that, I think the thing that's bothering me about this season is I've just got doubts as to whether or not a full fit Burnley squad, all of the first choice players in there playing the game that they play as well as they do, knowing each other's game inside out, whether that's going to be enough. Because so many of the teams around us seem to have improved dramatically out of nowhere.
No, I completely agree. And it's just escalated by the fact that we haven't spent money, obviously, in the transfer window. You look around at teams, and even the promoted teams, Fulham and West Brom, I think we're all being a bit harsh maybe, but like saying them two should go down. But you just look at Leeds. I mean, they're absolutely flying. And Aston Villa, again, a team that we really could have done with going down last season because, well, this season they've improved significantly. They've spent a lot of money again, and if you throw enough rubbish at the wall, eventually some of it's going to stick. So I think they've improved, and you're just looking at teams like Crystal Palace, West Ham in the last few weeks. Maybe if they can keep David Moyes in isolation, they can win the league. I mean, at the rate they're going. So yeah, it is worrying, and it's just compounded by the fact that we've not strengthened in the transfer window. I do think we should have enough to stay up, but that's just basing it on a Daesh Burnley, not by actually calculating it and looking at the other teams around us, because it really is worrying when you do look at how much they've strengthened, and we simply haven't, and we've gone backwards. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I think that's maybe we've not gone backwards, but maybe we've not gone as far forward as other people have. And a lot of people say, don't they, George, that if you stay static in this league, then you will be overtaken very quickly. Just a final word on that from you, then, George. 3 games, 3 defeats, 3 quite poor defensive performances. Not a lot of goals being scored. We know it's far too early to even think about this, but do we have enough? Do we genuinely have enough to survive? I know you're saying you think we do, but are we genuinely going to be fighting to stay 18th all season? 17th, sorry.
We will be fighting to stay 17th all season for sure. I think it's going to be a struggle, and I do think we've gone backwards just by letting Hendrick go and Lennon. These are players that we haven't even just simply replaced. So yeah, I think it's a season where we're going to be looking over our shoulders a hell of a lot.
Yeah, it is. Richard, does that make you angry? Does it irritate you, the fact that we're in the situation that we found ourselves in?
Yeah, of course, it's massively frustrated. We come 10th last season with an after lockdown a threadbare squad, and we've got slightly worse again. We're just not looking to progress at all. We've come 10th, and it's all of a sudden we're talking about, oh well, we're just happy to come 17th. I'm really torn on this. Obviously, a good season, for Burnley, given everything and all the circumstances, is just to stay up in the Premier League. But there's no ambition at all to progress at the club. The playing staff and Dyche, they all want to progress. And can we become a top half Premier League club, and with a little bit of investment, 2 or 3 more players adding to the group who have that quality? I really think we can be around that top half, and we're looking at it now. We've ended up signing Dale Stephens. In my opinion, I don't think he doesn't look anywhere near it. But we'll see how he gets on. And yeah, there's no excitement really at the moment. That Harry Wilson, if he come in, it would have been a great signing. So I'm really worried. As George said, we're going to be looking out over our shoulders. Villa against Liverpool, it might be a freak result. Look at they've signed some very good players. Barkley, for example. I think this summer more than others, I'm looking at other teams and going, they've recruited really well and they look like they're a level above us. So I've got massive concerns, but hopefully get a few players back, get everything settled down, and pick up a couple of results, and then we can start our season properly.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think at the moment, the first phase of the Premier League, it's looking like the 4 weakest teams at the bottom are obviously West Brom, Fulham, Burnley, and probably Sheffield United as well. Now there'll be other teams that go in and out of there, of course, as well as the season goes on. But certainly on the first 3 or 4 games, we aren't looking very strong. And I think certainly Newcastle and Southampton, we've already lost a couple of opportunities to get some points on the board where in previous seasons we would have picked up points against those. So yeah, that is very worrying. Robbie, there's been all sorts of talk this week about problems within the club. Chris Borden at Burnley Express has written quite a scathing article today, which is quite not out of character for him, but quite a bold move for a local newspaper who are usually very much in Camp Burnley and help with their PR exercise. He didn't hold back at all. And listeners, if you haven't read it yet, I would encourage you to go and click on it. I think it's a fantastic article. And we're going to hope to get Borden on here soon to get his thoughts. He talked about the club being borderline negligent with the way that they've let this go. There's also talk about an irrevocable relationship breakdown between Garlick and Dyche. With that in mind, do we suddenly start thinking that our future hinges on the Americans taking over?
Possibly, yeah. It's really hard to explain because I've never really felt this coming in the last few years or anything. We've always felt like a really stable club. We've always seemed to have really good foundations in place. When you think about clubs who have been relegated from the Premier League in recent years, you have always seemed to have problems at like the top of the club, and it always that whenever there's tension at the top of the club, it usually shows on the pitch, and that's my biggest concern at the moment is that we look so disjointed it's because they were so disjointed in terms of a boardroom level as well. So we need to get this whoever's going to take over, we need to get it sorted ASAP, and then we can start to focus on the results on the pitch. But it's just, since Project Restart and stuff like that, the positivity we had, obviously we had the banner flying over the Etihad, and the way Ben Mee come out and the positivity with that, and then the unbeaten run, we was like what was it, like 2 defeats in 12, something like that, which was really, really encouraging. We had so much momentum. We finished the season quite strongly, apart from Brighton. Finishing our top 10 in the top 10, and it's like, right, let's go build on that. Let's have a really good season. And it's just an absolute shambles now. And I've never felt so dejected from a football club. And I've never really felt such. There's a bit of a divide amongst this fan base as well. You've still got, there's fans like us who want us, to build on last season, who want to progress and be a little bit more ambitious. But then you've still also got the fans who still keep referring to the bloody Orient game in the 70s. Like, it's not even relevant anymore.
No, it's not, but I think the Orient game is still a really huge benchmark. I do agree. I get, one of the things that winds me up more than anything is when I get the Orient game thrown at me when I'm trying to make a valid point about where we are now. The fact remains is that the Orient game is a huge landmark in our club's history, and it's still a very, very important game for a lot of our older fan base who very much remember how close they went to losing their club. And I suspect that a lot of their caution and a lot of their concerns are very much to do with fear of that happening again. So I think, we just have to be, we have to be mindful of the fact that that was a long time ago now, and football has changed. And actually, the same ethos that we applied to the scenario back in 1987 is not going to be the same in 2020. We're going to start handing over to you in a minute. We're going to start calling up some of our listeners. I think we've got about 4 listeners who are going to be joining us this afternoon, just to give us their opinion on the current state of affairs in the club at the moment. Before we get on to that, George, one of the things that Bowden mentioned in his article, now we haven't fact checked this and we don't know whether or not this is right or not, but one of the things he mentioned is a disconnect between the expectations of Garlic, Rigg and Dyche. And he went as far to suggest that Garlic and or Rigg had tried to bring players in that Dyche had vetoed because they weren't the player he wanted. Now that's a little concerning. What do you make of those reports?
It's seriously worrying that, and I just don't understand it, because I tend to believe it, and I don't think Chris Bowden reports stuff that's wrong, and it's just it's so wrong of the club to be doing that, because at the end of the day, Dyche is the best manager we've had in a generation. I mean, that's undisputable, really, and yet they're now making bids for players that he doesn't want, while at the same time bringing in, apart from maybe Stevens, literally no one he actually wants to sign, and we're just completely letting him down. And I don't think there's smoke without fire, really. It does seem like there's a disconnect between the board and Dyche at the moment. He's not been as unhappy as he is now in the press conferences since he joined the club, since Project Restart and all the rumours started then. And it's just so disappointing to see him being let down like this. There's no point. Okay, we've got hardly any money. Well, there's no point wasting money on players that Dyche doesn't want, because at the end of the day, it's him who's going to have to coach these players. It's him who's setting the team up, and it's him who's managing us against these teams. Why bring in players that he doesn't even want? Why even waste our time with that? I just can't understand it. Just back the manager, and presumably he'll have a long list of players. Just go after them players. Like, people are saying, oh, Harry Wilson would have cost too much. Well, you'd have thought Dyche should have backup signings that he'd wanted instead. So, yeah, it's really worrying. And the most worrying thing is that we're probably about to see Dyche leave before long if this isn't repaired. And he's the best manager we've had, in a good half a decade. It's just, it wouldn't be acceptable, that at all. And there'd be uproar in the crowds.
Yeah, I think it's quite obvious to people watching inside and outside of the club that one of them's going. It's either Garlic or Dyche, and we all know which one we hope will go and which one will stay. Richard, I guess it's a bit difficult to analyse that assessment because we're not privy to the type of player that Garlick and Rigg wanted to bring in and why Dyche vetoed those. I think one thing that it did do for me was very much change the dynamic of me being 100% all guns blazing against the board and how dare you leave us in this situation, to actually thinking, okay, there's a deeper rooted problem here, and actually, why is Dyche vetoing those players, and is there a bigger disharmony here?
Well, I think it's clear there's unrest and kind of disagreements between Garlick, Rigg, and Dyche. I just fully agree with George. Dyche is the manager, and since his time here, he's picked his players to players that he wants. Overall, his signings and the recruitment have been very successful for us. Obviously, you can highlight players like Gibson. That was an absolute disaster. I do. I think that Dyche can be stubborn at times. I think there is more value for money in the European market that might suit us more. But at the end of the day, Dyche is the ones who sends the players on the pitch. He needs to trust those players. So you've got to back the manager and what the manager wants. And as George said there, if Harry Wilson was too much, okay, what's the backup then? It's kind of like we're seeming to be going for targets that are either unachievable or that the manager wants, and it's just caused absolute chaos and muddled thinking. I don't think it. And one thing I've always felt we've had at Burnley is, and a reason to keep Dyche, is that he's got complete control and autonomy on what happens on the football side, and that seems to be slipping a little bit away now. And even though in the past we've had injuries, we've had difficulties, we've had a stretched squad, you've always felt there's that unity in that spirit, and and Dyche has always been positive, and you feel like that's broken now, and that's my biggest concern. Is it's starting to, whatever's going on in the boardroom is starting to have an effect on the pitch, and I think the relationship's gone too far. I can't see Garlick and Dyche being able to work for much longer together, so fingers crossed for me personally. Listen, and anything new has its concerns, but moving forward, and if we want to keep Dyche, I think the only way to go is, for this takeover, because I just can't see how Dyche and Garlick can repair their relationship.
Yeah, it's worrying stuff. George, did you have something that you wanted just to flick in with this before we move on to get our first call?
Yeah, also it's not just that we need a lot more money. I think Dyche will probably leave before long if we don't get taken over, just because, not the dispute between him and Garlick, but just because there's only so much you can do with a club. A manager will want new ambitions, and if we do keep Garlick, our ambitions are not going to change in the next 10 years or so. It's just going to be to stay up. So I think we are relying on a takeover, because the money incentive of improving the squad's probably the only thing that would give Dyche some encouragement to stay here for another 5 or 6 years or what have you.
Well, let's get our first listener on the show, because it's about time that we listen to what some of our fans have said and see if anybody can put any logic to this madness that's going on at the moment. So we are delighted to be joined, first and foremost, by Will Lancaster. Will, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much.
A net spend of just over 1 million, bottom of the league table in terms of spends this season. And I think we were the second lowest spenders were Palace at 17.4 million. Can you sum up for us the disappointment for the transfer window?
Well, it just promised so much at the start. Obviously losing Jeff, losing Phil, Joe Hart, and then to only bring in Dale Stephens after no loan signings, Will Norris as well. Just disappointing. Harry Wilson, the whole saga turned down, and after a season that promised so much in 10th, to now be definitely bottom 3 is just appalling, really.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the Harry Wilson problem, Will, was really disappointing, wasn't it? We were all getting really excited, thinking that for once we were going to be able to sign a really exciting player and a young player and somebody who could complement Dwight McNeil and maybe help him raise his game. And then all of a sudden it just went to a ridiculous scenario where suddenly they were arguing over a couple of million here or there. and then the deal was off completely. I mean, do you think that we just needed to sell? Do you think that deal was always on the basis that we were going to sell Tarkowski and then we just didn't have the funds? Because if that's the case, that's even more worrying.
Well, I think the only thing that's really impacted our spending since coronavirus has come in is ticket sales and stuff, which, as the lowest capacity in the Premier League, it shouldn't really affect us as much as the other sides. I don't think that Tarkowski sale was impending on the Harry Wilson saga. I think to say that we've posted a profit every year since 2015, well over 30 million and stuff like that, I think £16 million shouldn't really be an issue for us. 10 million, Alan Nixon said towards the end, would have sealed the deal. But not even to spend over double digits at this stage and still have Kevin Long, Jimmy Dunn, as well as they've done at the start of the season, has definitely just summed up that we do need this investment. It's just not good enough, really. Even the championship window now, the supply and demand, say if we would sign Jed Wallace, been linked with him, I've seen, quite direct, quite nice, but he'd have only cost maybe 6-7 million, and now Millwall can look at us and go, oh, it's 12, 13, and you're right in saying about Dwight McNeil, it would take the onus off him to be our sole creator. We've got Johan Berg Gudmundsson, but as we've seen, he has glass knees, and to do 38 games a season with him as our only right winger for the second year in a row, it's just, I can't see us surviving, really.
Yeah, it is really worrying. Will, final thoughts then before we let you go and move on to our next caller. I think that the view on the panel is very much that we will survive and we've got enough in this squad when they're all fit to do it. What's your gut telling you? Do you think we are going to be in the bottom three, or do you think we'll survive by the skin of our teeth?
I think Fulham are a definite. At the start of the season, I'd have said West Ham as well, but after the last 2 game weeks, I think they'll be fine. I think it's a 3-horse race for 2 spots between us, West Brom and Sheffield United. And Fulham even spent well, so you can't even count them out fully, actually. Gut feeling is it'll be us, West Brom and Fulham, with Sheffield United and us battling until the last 2 or so game weeks. I think it'll be an exact mirror of the 2014-15 season.
Oh, Will, you're breaking our hearts. You're breaking
our
hearts. Well, thank you very much for coming on and giving us your opinion. We're going to try and get you back before the end of the season to see how this plays out. But thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of your season. Richard, just very quickly before we move on to our next caller, it seems like our fans are really down in the dumps at the moment. Do you think that it's not helping the situation with us all not being at the ground at the moment?
Yeah, I think Will made some really good points. I think when Turf Moor's rocking and when we've got the crowd behind us, it definitely makes a difference. You can see when we went on a bad run last season and we had the Leicester game at home, I thought the atmosphere was fantastic and it definitely willed the players on. So yeah, 100%, of course it makes a difference. But what I would say though, we seem to do pretty well without it in lockdown, but I suppose the pressure wasn't on us as much then, we was already safe. Yeah, similar to what Will said, I think it's too early to categorise teams and, to say this far, he's definitely going to be down there at the moment. I love Will's prediction. It's very precise, saying it's going to go down to the last 2 game weeks. If that comes off, Will, I think I'll be using you as my bookie in the future. But yeah, it's going to be difficult. And as I mentioned before, other teams look stronger. But listen, let's try and keep the faith. But yeah, definitely. I signed a petition too today, so I retweeted it on my Twitter. Everybody gets signing the petition to get football fans back in stadiums soon.
Oh yeah, well we'll come on to that before we get to the end of the show, because that's a really, really important point that's worth a plug. But before we do that, let us bring in our next caller. We are joined this evening by Stuart Parkinson. Stuart, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello. We've been trying to stay as positive as we can tonight, and we're trying to, although Will's brought us back down to earth a little bit. But from your perspective, is there a fundamental problem that can be overcome in this club, or is it just a case of lockdown jitters, coronavirus impact, no fans behind us? What's your gut feeling as to what's going wrong at the moment?
Personally speaking, I don't think it's so much the lack of fans in the ground. I think that's actually probably a good thing at the moment, given how, certainly looking at Twitter timelines, how crazy everybody's been about the transfer window. I think it's the injuries that we've had to the squad. So we're obviously missing our main defensive duo. Ben Mee being out is a massive, massive hindrance. And I think not having anybody available who's naturally a right winger is the other major problem that we've got. To me, it's injuries at the moment, and trying to fill those gaps and not putting square pegs into round holes again, like we did with Hendrick.
Yeah, well, we've done that a lot, and it was kind of disappointing to see that as well, in that obviously we brought Dale Stephens in, Stuart, to bolster that central midfield offering. But straight away, because of our injuries, we've had to bring Stephens in straight away into the middle. And we're not going to set Richard off on one about Dale Stephens because he's not his biggest fan at the moment. And then having to push Josh Brownhill out onto the wing to cover the right wing that's currently not got anybody playing in it. And then what you've then got is Dale Stephens playing in the middle, who's not quite up to speed yet. You've got Brownhill playing on a wing that is not his strongest position, although apparently we're told for Brentford he did play there quite a lot. But he's then lost his effectiveness. What would it have taken in the transfer window then for you to feel like we'd done good business? What was the minimum that you were expecting?
The absolute minimum that we needed out of the transfer window, as far as I could see, was having somebody on the right wing, absolutely, and potentially cover for central midfield. Now, I think we've done that with Dale Stephens. I think you're right in that he's been shuffled in because they weren't really expecting both Brady and Goodmanson to be out. But the fact that we've gone through another transfer window with two players who've suffered really badly from injuries, not necessarily that I think that they're made out of glass or anything like that, but I think it's definitely not helped that, again, Robbie Brady's been injured at Leicester for the second time running. We definitely needed somebody on that right wing. Dale Stephens is fine as cover, but having to use him in the centre now and pushing Brownhill out wide right, where he's clearly not that comfortable, certainly not as comfortable as he is in central midfield, is starting to remind me of what we did with Hendrick. I was quite a fan of Jeff's, very much in the minority, I think, with a lot of Burnley fans.
Oh, no, I was as well.
No, yeah, I've listened to the podcast long enough to know that you're a big fan of Jeff. But yeah, to me, we're doing the same thing again, and it's going to get us the same results, which is the player who's being played out of position not bringing the best that they can. I mean, we've seen it from Brownhill that he can perform in the centre, so why aren't we playing him there? The answer is that we didn't bother buying anybody to play out on the right.
Yeah, God, it's so disappointing, isn't it? I mean, I asked you the same question. No, it's all right. I'm just going to say, it's so disheartening that we are talking about this. You know, we've had, Stuart, this is our 5th consecutive season in the Premier League. We've had a top 10 finish. We've got into Europe. And it seems like we've just, flown massively behind the curve. How do you feel then as a fan? And I'm going to ask as many people as I can, because I know this is a really prickly subject. How do you feel about the possible American takeover? Does that make you nervous or does it make you excited?
My opinions change slowly over time. So I know I was previously quite hesitant about it. I think there's a lot of people who seem to think that it's be careful what you wish for, because look what's happened to them down the road with Venky's. I think I said as much to you actually on Twitter one time. But as I've looked at it more and more, I don't think it's the same kind of situation. It's not that we're being sold because there's a group of trustees who couldn't care less about the football club and want out, which I think is what happened down the road. I think this is Garlick probably realising that he isn't going to be able to fund the club like it needs to be. And hopefully, AL provide us with those extra funds. So I'm kind of hopeful that they'll be able to give us that injection of cash that we obviously need to be able to get deals over the line.
Yeah, that is a lovely summary, Stuart, and I think that gives me hope that I think you're right. It's very easy as fans to get emotional, isn't it, and to get a little bit irate when things don't go our way. That's what fans are. We're passionate, and we don't always think logically or clearly. Sometimes we let our hearts rule our mouths, and we go on rants, and we say things in the heat of the moment that we don't necessarily mean the bottom of our heart. But it's because we love the club so much and we want it to do well. Really interesting points on the takeover, Stuart, and I think you're right about Garlick, and I think we've said this in previous podcasts. We want to stop this toxic attitude towards the chairman. There has to be some respect for what he's done for the club, and I think that, like you say, that we've just now got to the stage where the club's outgrown him, and let's just hope he's doing as much as he can to do a smooth handover. Stuart, thanks for joining us on the show. Like I said, with Will, we will try and bring you back before the end of the season to see how your predictions came up. Before we go to our next caller then, Robbie, it was quite interesting to hear Stuart talk then about the fans not helping matters if they're in the stadium. Actually, this situation would be a lot worse. I know you love a good rant at a live football game, Robbie. Do you share that view? Do you think it would have been incredibly toxic if fans were in the stadium right now?
Yeah, I think so, especially after the window closed. I think obviously we probably go into the West Brom game. I think it'd be absolutely. I think it'd be I think you certainly feel the tension. I think if we were to go 1-0 down, I think the crowd would very quickly turn, especially if it was a near full house. And then obviously if the final whistle was to blow, I just think it'd be a chorus of boos, and then it just escalates into more toxicity. Then it goes into Twitter, and then that turns into players being abused, and then it's just. I just think it'd be an absolute mess.
Yeah, I think he's right. I'd not really thought of that. I think I'm just because I've been missing the ground so much. I think you're probably right. I think it's probably helping matters that we're all away at the moment. Well, let's move to our third caller of this evening, and I am very delighted to welcome back to the show Mike Landers, who has been on the podcast before. He's a friend of the show. Mike, you know the drill. Tell us how you're feeling.
Absolutely annoyed. I was so annoyed this weekend when I was hearing about the stuff that come out of the club. And that's not something that I've actually felt for a long time. But the frustration, the utter frustration with the way that the players' personnel, the transfers, whatever you want to call it, has been managed over the last 6 weeks, or actually since the end of June now, it's just ridiculous. And you kind of hope that the club was progressing off the field. You hope that the club was doing better, that we were actually a Premier League club. And I hate using the word tin pot because it means, it's so derogatory. But I just find some of the dealings and some of the way we've approached stuff to be utterly amateurish from the outside. And I think the one thing that really got to me as well, it kind of occurred to me, as Clarets fans, we know that Dyche is moving on at some point. He will not be there forever. And we kind of reconcile ourselves with that. And we reconcile ourselves with that on the idea that he's going to go off to a bigger club and receive a deal that he can't turn down. And every Clarets fan will go, fair play, mate, off you go. Thank you so much. That is too good. It's time to look after yourself. I never thought we'd be in a situation where it's actually the club feeling like it's us pushing him out. I never thought I'd feel that way.
Do you genuinely feel that way though, Mike? Do you think that, because I guess for me, I did feel that when we first heard these rumours of the chairman and the manager falling out. But actually, if all of these rumours about ALK are true and that the Americans are taking over, Garlick's going to be gone anyway. So why would he then push Dyche out? That seems to be against what I would thought would happen.
Well, I don't think he's pushing, Garlick's. I don't think Garlick's pushing him out deliberately. I think it's by his actions. I think the worry I have with the ALK thing is that what exactly is now the club? It's a club that where the manager's annoyed, where we've got 9 or 10 outfield players coming up for contract renewal, and we're not spending any money on reinforcements. Here was a chance to get some reinforcements in to ease that situation, to ease the pressure on the manager. And it's kind of like, if you're trying to sell the club, that's the least attractive thing you could do, because ALK are going, oh, right, now we have to spend money straight away in January and probably get these other 9 players either new contracts or replacements. I don't get it. I really don't. And I think the thing that also annoys me so much is that over previous transfer windows, we've held so many reasons why players don't come. And as Clarets fans, we've kind of accept that. We understand the situation we're in. We understand the situation with finances, the way the club is run. But you take all those on board. For instance, the classic one for me is there isn't the market value, or players were more expensive than the market was actually asking. I actually looked at the Harry Wilson situation. Liverpool were asking 15 million quid, right? They sold Jordan eBay for 50. I'll get it right. 15 million. Dominic Solanke, 19 million. Rhian Brewster, 23 million. Now you're telling me that Harry Wilson, with 31 Premier League appearances and 7 goals in the Premier League, is not worth 15 million quid if that's the market? Matty Cash.
Yeah, I've got to
went to
say,
Villa.
I agree. I've had quite a few conversations. I completely agree. And there's been quite a few people who've been saying, oh, if Liverpool want 20 million for Harry Wilson, then we've got to move away. It's the right thing to do. But I think we're not the ones, are we, Mike, to make that what's the word I'm looking for? Make that valuation. It's the experts, and that's what the current market dictates.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, right, I agree to an extent. I agree that it's a negotiation. But at some point, you've got to bite the bullet. You have to do something, especially when we don't actually have any fit players in that position. Sometimes you just have to swallow it. And 15 million plus add-ons, and we went for, 12 million plus 5 in add-ons. I mean, this is kind of like, it just, I don't get it. It feels like there is a, and I've used this phrase before, there is a difference between being prudent and being cheap. And in the previous experience, I found the board generally are being prudent, and I can understand it. It really feels like this time they were just being cheap, and being cheap at the wrong time as well. That's it just feels wrong, and that sounds daft, especially trying to explain it. But I think the feeling among fans I've talked to, it's just something's not right there. And if you can't get a player like Harry Wilson, who is not in Liverpool's plans, and you can't get him for a price where 3 years ago we were spending that money, something's wrong,
Yeah, definitely. I think we've just found the title of this week's podcast, "Cheap at the Wrong Time." That is a great line. Mike, before we let you go then, what's your gut instinct? Do we survive this season, or do you think we're in trouble?
It's very hard to tell. I'll try and keep this brief. The lack of fans in the stadium is making football very, very weird. We've seen it with these results, and these results would never happen with fans in the stadium. What I worry about is our style of play, the players that we have. We kind of feed off that. We feed off the fans at the turf supporting it. We feed off the opposition not liking it, and the opposition fans not liking it. And I worry that our style of play and our style of players aren't suited to the current situation. I do think we're better than 3 other teams, but God, don't ask me to name them. But I think it's going to be a hell of a lot closer than it should be.
Oh well, I feel sad that you're sad, Mike. I don't like you being sad. I like happy Mike. So we're sending you virtual love from None and Ever HQ, and we will speak to you before the end of the season to see if we manage to cheer you up a bit.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. George, just before we bring our last listener in, I think Mike made a really good point there about valuations, particularly looking at Liverpool's previous sales and this ridiculous idea about valuations of Harry Wilson. have we got ourselves in a situation now where our own stubbornness about, and particularly Dyche's stubbornness about what he believes players are worth, are actually causing us the biggest problem here?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was a very valid point about Liverpool's previous dealings. I mean, they've conned everyone for half the youth squad. I mean, they'll be looking at us and thinking, why won't you pay the same for Wilson? And it suits them, to be fair, because and it is a weird season. Players have been getting positive tests at Liverpool. You only have to look. Shaqiri today's been given a positive test. So they'll be looking at this and thinking, we don't need to sell Harry Wilson. He can fill a slot on our bench if stuff like this happens. So unless you're going to pay the right amount of money, there's no point letting him go. And I think us haggling over them few £1 million up front or whatever it was, just absolutely ridiculous. It's silly and it's just born idle, and it's going to leave us in deep trouble this season. And it's probably a good job that fans aren't in the stadium, because I agree with Robbie that they'd quickly be turning. It's just not good enough. And also, Wilson would have been an important signing because, as Mike correctly said, this season's bonkers. And the most bonkers thing is the amount of goals that are being scored. And that does not suit our
Yeah.
game one bit.
No, I'm really worried about that, and that's something I'm going to come on to in another podcast. I am absolutely terrified about that because the days of us nicking a 1-0 win are well gone. Oh God, you know, this podcast started so positively and it's just gone downhill. So let us turn to our final caller of the night. I'm delighted to be joined by Dan Barnes. Dan, welcome to the show. You've got the slightly unenviable task of closing us out for the night. We've had some really sad Burnley fans on. Can you give us any glimmer of hope that everything's going to be okay?
Well, I can try my best, but I am feeling pretty negative, to be honest.
Oh, no. Okay, group hug. Let it out, Dan. Come on. We will be in your ears.
Well, I think first of all, you have to say it is frustrating because the club's, in terms of the squad, is in a weaker position than the start of the window, and in the Premier League, that just should not be happening. But I think it is also important to have a bit of perspective because, you know, apart from Hendrick, it is pretty much the same squad that did so well in the second half of last season. And thankfully, you know, Tarkowski's still at the club, Pope's still at the club, McNeil's still here. We've also obviously kept hold of Sean Dyche, which is absolutely vital. So we know we can turn this round, and obviously with the international break, with a few players coming back from injury, hopefully very soon. Hopefully we'll be back to winning ways before we know it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, did you share Dyche's summary that he said when he was, because he seemed to change tune, didn't he, Dan? He was really having a go at the chairman quite openly, and I was actually annoyed at Dyche when he had his bit of a tantrum in the presser when he was clearly being very obstructive with the media guys and making it very clear what his feelings were on the transfer policy. And then almost overnight, he changed his tune quite a bit and started talking about how the squad was fine. And actually, when all the players are fit, there's going to be no problem. Do you think that the squad fully fit, the first team out there, the players that we know and love all playing together, do you think they've got it in them to be able to adapt to the differing challenges of the Premier League this season, to nullify those goals, to score more goals are going to be needed? Or, you know, are we really going to be stuck in a strategy that's always worked for us that suddenly we've got no answer to?
I think the squad is definitely capable of staying up. I think it all depends on whether Dyche still feels like it's a job that he's motivated in. And I think because of his relationship with the players, I think that won't be an issue yet. And just to kind of touch on when you spoke about Dyche's sort of change of heart, I wonder if that is actually because he's kind of looking at the takeover rumours. Maybe he knows something more than we do, and maybe he's expecting to come into a bit of money in January when this American business potentially gets involved. So I think that'll be really interesting to see how it pans out.
Yeah, definitely. You're obviously really clued up, Dan, and I know we're going to be speaking to you, definitely going to be speaking to you before the end of the season. I know we've been in albeit I've just realised that there's a few emails that you sent me that I've not replied to, so I'm going to apologise on air.
No problem.
Not let producer Matt kick me because he keeps kicking me about things that I've not yet done in the None in Every inbox. So we'll certainly be talking to you before the end of the season. I know you've expressed an interest to get involved, and we'd love to have you. I guess you are very well connected in terms of football gossip. In terms of the championship pool of players that we know we now are limited to, and also the various lists of free agents, can we please not include the also made out of glass Jack Wilshere in that category, though, please? Is there anybody out there who you've seen rumours of or know is available that could do a job for us if we can get them in the next 2 weeks?
I haven't seen anything yet, but I think the main one to look at is Craig Dawson, because obviously there has been so much interest from Dyche's side in the past, and with obviously us being able to offer that attraction of Premier League football, then I think it is something that could possibly happen, especially with obviously Gibson now with his future sorted out. I think the club definitely does need another option at centre back. And he'd probably be fairly cheap as well. So I think that's one we could see happen. But I think at this stage, it's just a waiting game, really.
Yeah, I worry about the championship obviously the EFL transfer window, as it's been termed now, just because I think Will mentioned on it before. The prices, they're just going to see us coming a mile off, cap in hand. Please, sir, can we have a player? And it's going to be like the transfer window the other year when we sent that email out asking for who's available on deadline day. They're just going to laugh us out the building and say, Craig Dawson, yeah, he's worth 15 million for us now. We're going to be going for promotion. So I don't see us signing anyone personally, just because they're going to be charging absolutely through the roof. And if we can't pay the money for Harry Wilson, who's a fairly established player and a good up-and-coming player, what's the chances of us splashing the money now? Unless we get taken over. Maybe that's the case. Maybe Dan's right. We're going to get taken over in the next few days. Here's hoping.
I'll be really annoyed if we get taken over like 48 hours after the transfer window close. I'm like, man, could you not have sorted this out earlier? Do you know what they need? They need a good lawyer. I'm going to put my hand up. Dan, it does seem a little bit of a strange strategy, doesn't it? If we're always being cited as money problems being the reason why we're not able to compete in this market, yet we consistently go into a really overinflated championship market where it's a well-known fact that those players cost way more than they're actually worth. That's an odd strategy.
Yeah, I think it's a case of how much the championship market has changed, really. I mean, Dyche in the past has spoke about how, you just simply don't get those bargains anymore, like we did with Nick Pope from Charlton. And I think he's in a tough position now because, that was always kind of his safety net, where if there wasn't really a good deal to be had, then he would fall back to the Championship. But even now, I mean, those quality players in that league are really hard to get now. So I think it just shows how tough it is for a club like Burnley to compete, even in the midst of Championship fees now. I think it's probably something we expected to change with obviously the COVID implications, but it hasn't. It's just the spending is still there, and with the Ollie Watkins deal, it's bigger than ever now. So I think it's just a sign of how crazy really the football market is.
Yeah, you're right, Dan. Okay, then before we let you go, same question that we've had to everybody: how does this season play out? What's your gut instinct?
Well, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a bit worried, but I think at this stage, I think I'm still going to back the players. I'm going to back Dyche, and I'm going to say that we're going to have enough to avoid the drop. Obviously, you look at teams like Fulham and West Brom, and you think we should be able to come above them. And hopefully, hopefully we can have another sort of similar run to last season, where we obviously had a really poor run, completely bounced back from that, and in the end, weren't even worried about relegation.
Amen to that. Well, thank you very much, Dan. It's been a pleasure. We will talk to you again before the end of the season. That's all of our 4 callers, guys, Richard, George, Robbie. Fantastic input from our listeners. I really, really enjoyed that. I think they all made some really valid points, even though we did try to get some positivity, listeners, but I think everybody's just feeling really down in the dumps at the moment. Richard, just coming to you very quickly before we sign off for the week. You'd heard some quite interesting explanation about the financial implications that the club, hadn't you, this week? Is there anything from that you can share?
1 second. Let me get the message. Yeah, so,
I'm going to put Richard on the spot. Get your message out, Richard. Come on.
have to find it. Yeah, so this was from a source of mine. He shall not be named due to legal reasons. No, I'm only joking. So just a Burnley, a fellow Burnley fan who's a bit, he knows more than me about the financial side of football and the goings on and stuff like that. He just kind of basically sent me a message saying, I just said, what's going on with the Burnley transfer window in your opinion? And he said, based on most recent accounts, loss of matchday income alone means we will be running an operational cost. Add to that the loss of other commercial revenue, dropping TV money, e.g. Sky 200 million rebate, loss of a China deal, deferred money from outgoing transfers down, ingoing transfers up. We are undoubtedly drawing on reserves. The only question is how quickly they are being depleted. Personal wealth of board members doesn't compare to every other owner. I don't know, but I suspect the Wilson bid was about our limit. Once he proved to be beyond us, then where do you go for someone to improve the first team? You get absolutely nothing for less than 15, 20 million in this market. We have kept Dwight and Tarky, which is a positive. It may have been the case of keep them and limited incomings or sell one and free up some money. Not an ideal situation, but I would prefer to keep than sell and bring in lesser players. We might still get the odd squad filler in from the EFL, but it is hard to see much more. If we get a throw in with injuries, we've still got a chance of staying up. So obviously that's the financial side. I thought it was just a really interesting message that I shared, in our WhatsApp group. What I will say to that is I completely understand that money is going to be tighter because of COVID. Obviously, we've not sold a player for a long time for a significant amount of money, which obviously impacts what we can spend. But I think in the last 2 years, we've had a net spend of about 5 or 6 million. I think I read. So surely there is money there to go and sign a player. And as George mentioned, if we didn't get Wilson, who's the backup to that? In terms of the transfer situation, I'm not going to totally lose my completely lose it until the end of next Friday. Fingers crossed we do get somebody in, but I'm really not hopeful of that. And it's all a big if we don't get injuries. If this happens, we have left ourselves short in terms of a squad. It's going to be a really, really difficult season. But what I will say is, and I'll try and finish it on a positive note, those players who we've got in the squad now, I'll absolutely back them, to the hilt. We've got absolute Clarets heroes in that team. Pope, Tarky, Ben Mee especially, Westwood, Barnes. They would absolutely, give everything for the shirt. So hopefully we get that one club mentality back and we get a few results and we can pull through it. But if we have another run of injuries throughout the season like we've had at the start, it's going to be very, very difficult for us.
And we end the show on that night. We end the show on the night. We end the show on that note. God, where do we even start with all of that? We have tried our best to try and unpick what's going on at the club. I know it feels very doom and gloom at the moment, guys, but there is a glimmer of hope in there. This is Burnley, for God's sake. This is Dyche. This is Ashley Barnes. This is Ashley Westwood. This is a Premier League club where our two Ashleys bought a minibus to ferry the players to the ground to car share. This is us. This is the club that survived the Orient game in 1987 for our listeners of that generation. This is a club that has enjoyed success and finished in Europe and finished 10th in the Premier League for our younger generation. We will get through this. It will be fine. You are, as fans, entitled to feel down in the dumps at the moment and to get angry and to get frustrated. But we've got a long season ahead of us. We've only played 3 games. There are 35 games left. There are all sorts of twists and turns going ahead. And we have got Dyche at the helm, who will do his absolute best to steady the ship and get us playing back to the standard that we know and love. Lots of people to thank this week because it's been a very busy show. We, as always, start with thanking producer Matt, who has got a bit of an editing task this week with lots of people's audios to feed in. So thank you, Matt. band Joyce for providing us with our music, royalty free, which we appreciate very much. To our 4 absolutely fantastic listeners, our call-ins tonight, Will Lancaster, Stuart Parkinson, Mike Landers and Dan Barnes, who were absolutely brilliant, and I can't wait to hear from them again before the end of the season. To my 3 panellists, Stuart and I'm going back over the call list. I'm so sorry, I'd forgotten my panelist names already. My wonderful panellists who I love immensely, Robbie, George and Richard, for joining me this week and analysing all of that. My final thanks, of course, go to you, the listener, for downloading and listening to this podcast. Your support is very much appreciated, and we would not be here without you. It is time now for a 2-week break. The Clarets don't meet again now until the 17th of October, where we've got that must-win game against West Bromwich Albion. In that time, we've got players out in international break. We've got a chance for all of us to sit back, reflect, compose ourselves, and get ready to cheer the boys on when they get back. I hope you're all staying safe. Our best wishes go to all of you. Take care. This has been the No Nay Never podcast. Until next time.